But let's move on to our next topic, shall we? Because as we heard earlier in the show, new research by the University of Bristol suggests climate change discussions are still dominated by white men. And it's something that environmentalists and campaign groups have come under fire for in the past. So is the climate change movement unrepresentative? And Joycelyn, this comes from a year-long study in Bristol, doesn't it? It found that voices of ethnically diverse people make up just 3% of discussions on climate change decision-making. You have founded a company called Climate in Colour. I think one of the things you're trying to do is try to make sure that conversations are more diverse. So are you surprised by this finding?
No, of course not. I'm not surprised by this finding because the inequality that we see in other parts of life, other industries, is not any different in the climate space. But I think that a key thing to keep in mind is where we are kind of looking at these discussions, because through my work, people of colour, women and people from marginalised communities are actually on the front line of these issues, on the front line of the effects of these issues, but also at the front line and leading action in many ways. So when we say that there's a lack of diversity in climate change discussions, I think we need to think about where those discussions are happening, because it seems like there's a huge disparity between on the ground, grassroots and frontline representation of marginalised communities, and then sort of institutional, organisational and governmental conversations. And I think there is where we see a huge issue.
Bruce, what's the situation like in the States?
It's exactly as you were describing in the UK, which is we have historically made a lot of decisions that are by a very small part of society. And we now know, and we're seeing policies begin to put in place to actually address this. So in California, for example, recently a law was passed that no longer can the boards of corporations be all men and all white. And so how do we open up decision-making? So as Joycelyn said, particularly for people who are the most affected, we will make better decisions and more durable decisions if we're involving the very people who are impacted by being on the front lines of this climate crisis.
What do you make, Joycelyn, of steps like that? How do you think we should address this?
Well, I think there's a really important quote by Thomas Sankara, which I can paraphrase, but the inclusion of marginalised communities is not one that's out of charity. It's because it is a real necessary basis for a kind of triumph and success in overcoming the climate emergency. These people are not just victims. They're not people that we have to include because of charity. They're actually so creative and so dedicated out of, in a lot of times, necessity. So really our success will be built on the inclusion, and it is a necessity rather than a sort of charitable action.
And Joycelyn, a very quick thought on COP26 coming up. How confident are you that a diverse range of voices will be heard there?
I think that will depend on which zone you're in. I think the blue zone, not so much. There are huge barriers from the UK Home Office and from vaccines and all of these different barriers, financial barriers. In the green zone, there are a huge amount of events. We've got COP26 Coalition doing such amazing work. So many activist groups are going to be there, and that's where the real diversity is going to stand out, in my opinion.